we put those rules together. Uh, I was getting into the unique orcs, which are like total model swaps. And so, like I was saying, what's super important is that we were, they still need to build off of a character that already existed because that story is that they get transformed into this. That's a lot more impactful than this character shows up. And there are versions where a character just shows up. Like this is a bard. He's got a funny hat and a poofy sleeve, and he carries a lute, and he always speaks in rhyme. And so what that means is that it doesn't make sense for a normal guy to one day turn into a bard. So that's a story that we built of a guy who's different from the first moment he pops up. But these stories don't engage with the nemesis system quite as deeply as the transformation stories. Because this guy's awesome and funny, and you're like, oh, I want him in my army, or maybe it's a guy like this who pops up and he's really scary. Like I'm afraid of him. But that story has less places to go, and it's less meaningful to the player themselves. It's less interactive than a story of a guy who you fought several times and then you dropped a spider's nest on his head and he came back covered in spiders and he's like, you did this to me. So we put when we were evaluating these two, we always said this is more useful, these transformation stories. Yeah. Yeah. This is yes. This is super important. So, sometimes we would block it. So if I go back to this guy, so um, some of these where they get like metal heads, that will never work with the guy who's covered in spider webs because like there's no model that somebody's built that can combine those two things together. And we could have built that, but that would have been a waste of our time of fitting content together. So what we would just do is block that guy from becoming that. There's also the other side of that where after a guy becomes unique, you can still kill him, you can still cheat death, and he should acquire scars at that point. So we we have two choices. We cannot apply the scar. Like it has to be valid in our game where they just don't pick up scars when they show up. And again, that works because we don't show the player how that works. That's okay, but it would be cool to show scars. So a lot of the scars are designed as things that can be layered on. So like scars on your skin, or some of these will still fit with the special ones. So there's a little bit of variability in these guys. Like this guy can have different faces. He's he's got this the spider webs are a hat rather than a head. So he can have a version of this head with a scar on it, or we can apply the scar onto it later. Um, his hands are not affected. Like it does have specific. This is actually his gauntlets, but we can still do the like chop off his arm, he gets a hook arm. And we just kind of the way that that worked is four there's like a character type of the spite the webbed, and and then you can just mark off things that are not valid. Like it just says these transformations are not valid. Scar, head covered in bandages. Scar, head covered in like iron wrappings. But this is valid. Like then there's a list of permitted ones. So what we had to make sure is that there was enough enough player freedom in them. But our core value was we never wanted to go all the way. We never said everybody can be these guys. We just locked it off. They're also unique for an important procedural generation reason. Like when I call them unique, these guys are actually so distinct that we only let them spawn once per player save. And that's because there's kind of there's a mental division in the player's mind between characters that have variety but you don't look at them that much and characters that feel super unique. And so when we have like all of these guys, they all look like this. These are actually like normal orcs. When we have guys, these are grunts, so they do look less cool. But that kind of forms our under tier of normal variation, and then having the special guys on top of it makes them pop more. There's a lesson from Bethesda about that, where when they were doing Oblivion, they had they had a system. You know, they built like 200 handmade dungeons. All the dungeons are handmade. Every designer is responsible for like 25 dungeons. But they allowed them to share like room layouts, and then they would like customize it. So they had rooms that were like, this is a sacrificial altar. Here's the altar, and there's a candle. And then the feedback that they got after they shipped that game is that there were a lot of repeated rooms and dungeons. And so they were like, well, we specifically didn't allow that. We did make every room unique, but the player perception is that they were the same because players anchor on the most important and visible details. So because this was like the altar room, it always felt like an altar room no matter how much you dress it up, no matter if you put blue candles in it or yellow candles, or if you added a bunch of like spiders into it or whatever. So we have so like later on Bethesda says you can't reuse those hero props. You can reuse the placement of small objects because that part doesn't matter as much, but you can't reuse like the thing that catches your eye. And that's kind of what we were doing with these as well. Um, there's also, and this is just a thing about being flexible in our definitions. This guy looks really weird. He's the twins. He's got like a conjoined head, and he always talks about like, uh, "Are you sure, brother?" Like he talks to himself as though he's two people. Uh, when you actually look at him, he's got a unique head, and he can't wear helmets, but he's actually totally normal underneath. So although he has to be created from birth, like we're not going to apply the twins to a guy who's already alive, he is more flexible for acquiring scars and other transformations. Yeah. It's still the heads don't have that. They're actually it sort of. Here's what I want to say. Um, Slim body, medium body, heavy body. There are a couple heads that fit on any of these. There are a couple heads that only fit on the slim guys, and there are a couple heads that only fit on the heavy guys. So I think the twins would be. I don't think we'd put him on the defender, but he could go on any of those other guys. So that's a process of like. I think the requirement for designing this is that he work with normal or thin bodies, and they're like that's a reasonable level to take it. Let's see. There's also something super important about this, which is what they sound like and how their dialogue works. And this is actually killer. Like, this will stop you dead because you take the twins, and the twins is always going to talk like this, and the bard is always going to talk in rhyme. And that means that they can't, that means two things. We need to have them have a way to cover all the events that an orc can do, and we need them to be a reasonable transformation from another guy. So not specifically these guys, but like the spider guy, once he gets transformed, most of his lines are about being covered in spiders. He really doesn't like it, and he has spider powers now. That has to make sense in terms of the way that his voice sounds and in terms of how he has other lines with who he was before. So the way that we did that, we have like 6 voice actors, uh, is we have personalities. So does each voice actor does 3 different reads where they kind of shift their voice, but they're still doing themselves. And then those are the only characters that can become the unique characters that they voice. So once they acquire unique lines, like we've already cut off a lot of that, but that's okay because they're still going to show up. The event that triggers this guy is still going to happen enough that he'll probably show up. But that also means there's a flip side of that, which is that this guy who has, and he does sound like the more normal orc that he was before he turned into this guy. We don't need to record lines for him for like, I heard a noise, I'm going to investigate it. Or all the like hundreds of generic lines that every orc has to say to be functional in the game, because he can fall back to the more generic orc. So it was so important to be able to fall back. And this fits into that whole putting the unique content where it is going to matter to the player and not bothering to fill out all the rest of the procedural space. It's like very we have a huge matrix of stuff that needs to work, and we do need to fill it out, but we're only going to build loci into certain ones for these guys. So the final way that you build an orc is you take their base class, you add on top of it the advanced class, which gives them some new armor pieces. You add their tribe, which also gives them armor pieces and weapon pieces. You add the scars, which can kind of go on top of that, and then they either get a special role, which is that it's the like semi-transformed stuff, or they become fully unique. And so it's that we layer on as many pieces that we can, but we're willing to break that when we want to get bigger. This is just talking about how we always have fallbacks. Like we need to do all these things and we need to do way more. So when there is, you just don't need to fill this out for everybody. Fill out the stuff that's important and make it plausible when you're not going to do it. Um, okay, so all of these things about like how characters can change and how you can get ambushed and how characters can die are a big problem for the game that we were building. As much as I showed you that hierarchy screen, and I was saying, this is like a gameplay space. The player can initiate missions from here and do all this stuff where they're fighting, and it's iterative. It'll keep going. We're still shipping a story game that has story missions, and that means that the story missions don't like the Nemesis system. So you've got bosses. Well, if you're fighting a boss, like you can't get ambushed by an orc. That would be pretty silly. If you're flying on a drake, well, the orcs can't really tackle you in midair. Um, if you have a balance for a mission, what we ended up having to do was turn off most of the Nemesis system stuff. And so this was also a constant battle where like the system designers are asking the level designers, can you please make it more open? But the level designers who are like, I'm trying to balance this so that it's challenging for a player of this level. Or I want you to have a companion and the companion can't die. They would turn it off. So this is like a reason why this is hard to put in a lot of games. This is Bruce. This is a story character, and this is really weird. He's well written. He's super well written. He's really funny, and he does a really important story. He kind of tutorializes in a story how you befriend orcs, how you take over forts, and how they betray you. But because he's a story character and because we have all these story missions, he can't die. And that means that when you finish a mission that you just did with this orc who's actually he's he has more dialogue than any other orc because it's all custom cutscene dialogue. He disappears off the map and he doesn't play in the same space. And so even though he's the one teaching you how the Nemesis system works, he doesn't follow its rules. So that's super weird. And it was a problem that we wanted to solve, but we just didn't solve it. What we ended up doing, and this is kind of a cool compromise, is we finished the story mission. The story of him is you meet him. He says, "Oh, you want to take over the fort? I can help with that. This is all you have to do for orcs." And he helps you build an army. He takes over the fort with you, and when you kill the boss, he's like, "Great," and he kicks you off the fort, and you die. And he's like, "Now it's my fort." And he doesn't know that you're undead. So then you come back, and you're angry, and you shame him, and you break his brain. And that teaches you that when you shame them, you can actually make them go deranged. And so then once that happens, you've like kicked him out of the fort. We release him to the Nemesis system. So that was like our compromise with the level designers. Well, we'll spawn a Nemesis character that looks like this guy and has like lines by this voice actor, but he will at that point, like once the story is done. The really cool thing that nobody expected is that our system built a story that almost every player saw. So once you've shamed him, he's deranged, he's created as a Nemesis character, and he exists in the world. We were still tracking the player interest score and summing up every interaction you had with him for all those story missions. So it turns out that this guy suddenly has the highest player interest score like on the map. And what that means is that when the game is deciding like who's going to challenge the fort captains to take it over, it's going to be this guy. Even though he's deranged and the only dialogue he has now is, "I don't want the fort. I never wanted the fort. You can have the fort." So he'll say that and then he'll start this mission. And then because he's got the super high player interest score, he usually wins. And then he challenges the fort commander, and he usually takes over the fort. And so then he takes it from you. You go in and you meet him, and he's sitting on the throne. He gets up and he says, "I don't want the fort. I never wanted the fort. You can have the fort." And we're like, "Wait, what?" And it's like, "Oh, wait, of course that would happen because he's got the highest player interest score." That's awesome. Let's not change anything about it. That was great. And it was just like a natural story that the game systems are telling. Okay, so those are big problems with it. So what can we do to fix them? Well, this is kind of a story of how we didn't fix them. So it doesn't play well with campaign missions. The Nemesis system tells revenge stories more than anything else. Even the like ally stories that it tells are kind of creepy. It's like a domineering friendship. And it also has this whole thing where characters cheat death, which is like, how do you fit that in a lot of fictional worlds? How do you make that make sense? The orcs are basically pro wrestlers. How do you make that make sense? So when we were developing the follow-up game, what we were pushing for was no golden path missions. So can you make a game that can sell for $60 that doesn't have pre-built story missions? And what are the relationships that we go to from here? So we picked romance and rivalry. And we didn't, rivalry was going to be you have a friend, but they want to be better than you. So they're still your friend, but that can turn into an enemy over time. Like that can turn that way, or it can turn into a true friend again if you've resolved the conflict. And romance is something that can be fed into from friendship or super edge cases of like uh, of an enemy relationship and stuff like that. Um, this is the game that we weren't able to finish that the publisher didn't want. So this is the game that was killed to make the Wonder Woman game, basically. So I can't say that we solved it, but I do still believe that this is kind of the way to go to make it fit into a more normal game. New IP. So this is also why Warner Brothers didn't really want it. Like this is really scary to them. How do you so so Shadow of War cost us like $120 million to develop, and then the marketing cost another 80 to $100 million. And this is a big part of why projects that are finished also don't get released, because to the publisher they look at it and they've already spent the money to make it, but then they know that they need to spend almost as much money again to sell it. And if they're not willing to do that, they just have it and they're sitting on it. For us, we spent 3 years on this. That's like 45, $50 million. Um, but it never got to a point where they felt comfortable going like, okay, yes, we will both finish the rest of your budget and spend that much more on the next game. And this also, in a development cycle like this, it means that every 6 to 9 months we would kind of recast it. Like, well, what if they were DC heroes? Would it work? And like, eh. And for us, it was this doesn't make sense with the Nemesis system. We kept on pitching things like, does it make sense in Game of Thrones? Does it make sense in DC? And it kept hitting, no, it doesn't, because it's such a weird concept where guys need to cheat death. Where for a superhero game, if your player character is procedurally generated, like just like that was kind of the pitch, like you would follow the same rules as all the Nemesis orcs. That's not what the fantasy, like what's the fantasy of a DC game? That's what we got. Like, yeah, it just doesn't work like that. So yeah, like in this, original character, and like all the orcs are original characters. What do you think of D&D as an IP? Right? Like, what is? I actually don't know the answer. What is D&D as an IP? I guess. But like, what is Forgotten Realms? Yeah, but I guess I don't. I think this is the trouble with a lot of things like that, where like I think the association with D&D is with an activity, not with characters in a world that I love. And so I it has some juice, but it would not. I'm almost positive it would not have carried something like this over the line. Yeah, and that really is that it's that threshold of it's that threshold of risk. This is like the problem when the budget gets so high is that the risk gets so high, and so it makes sense to this is a decision that's going to affect like hundreds of people's jobs if it fails. So everybody trends more conservative when the budget gets higher. Yeah. Um, yes, but free to play games are super IP driven as well. Yeah. Oh, you don't remember a time when we didn't know the characters of Overwatch? Yeah, I think it's really hard, and even I mean Blizzard is terrified of new IP right now. Like it's extremely difficult, and it's difficult at these budget levels. But it did not make money, is the funny thing. Like, but that's a game that had, it had like a lot of monthly players. Like, probably when they said we're not doing content updates, it probably still had at least 500,000 monthly players. Yeah. Well, when you think like, okay, what does it need to make this a success? It's going to need a lot of continued marketing to draw new players in. It's going to need a lot of development. You're going to need to be spending like, at least $15 million a year on development. Like, mhm. How I would be interested. My belief is that that doesn't work very well. Like, I think that makes sense as a thing that you can pitch, and it might work as a like pitch to get your game going, but because you've got inflow and outflow. So I think you can have a stronger effect if it's an inflow. Like, this game has characters that you already know. Maybe you'll want to play it. I think that's reasonably strong. That's the same argument as having IP. But the outflow, this game will make you want to try other games. I don't have any like numbers on that. I don't think it would be super big. No, I mean, they didn't see it from the movies. Yeah. Why do people love the world of League of Legends? Have the writers done an amazing job? Yeah. The TV show is actually super important. Yeah. Well, but think about it. Like, League of Legends was around for 10 years before they had like a story success, but they always had character success. Like, you saw people at conventions dress up as League characters back like early 2010s. So it was working on that level, but I don't think it was working as a narrative project. Yeah, they were willing to retcon stuff. Yeah, and they had teams. They went through multiple teams of people being like, we're going to be the ones who will retcon League and make it make sense. And none of them stuck. And so what stuck was an animation project that was super successful that people liked, and that was much more of a narrative experience. So once that became true and people watched it, they believed it to be true. And they're like, this makes sense for the world. This is what I think the world is. In a way that none of the other stuff is narrative content. So when they added narrative elements onto it, you know, people forgot it or didn't pay attention. Even for Riot, it's hard to keep something like that running. Like, it's expensive. They get pull from bringing characters in, but is that pull to keep players? Is that going to keep the game alive for a year, for 2 years? Like what that I think helps you out with is when your game launches, getting like a boost of characters or boost of players. Uh, yeah, I enjoyed it when it was canceled. That was when I was like, it's time to leave. I thought it was cool. One thing I want to say, which is about the people on your team. So this is Chris Hoagie. He's giving his actual talk about the Nemesis system and how it works, which is really good. Um, he is there were a bunch of people responsible for it, but he's the one who is more responsible for it than anybody else. Um, what's weird about him is he doesn't play very many video games. If you have a conversation with him about video games, he spends most of it going, "Wait, I don't understand. Can you go and explain that to me?" So he doesn't sound like a designer. He will, he'll like, but on the other hand, he's he's an interesting guy. He worked as like an aircraft engineer for a while. He lived in Namibia for 10 years. Um, and he approached problems differently. So when other people are working on building this game, he was focused on what are the emotions that players feel and why will they want to engage with it. And like nobody else was asking it. When we talk about games, our tendency is to talk about how to build them, how the pieces are going to interact. It's not to get on the MDA. It's not very often on the aesthetic side of it. And because he was and there are two sides of this. Because he was so different, he was able to see something and like build something that nobody else was. Because he was so different, he was easy to ignore and when and kind of get misunderstood. So when we were building this game, he was not as influential. When they moved on to build the Wonder Woman game, he was still there, but he was not an influential voice, and that's because he was different than everybody else in the studio, and he doesn't sound like a designer, so he was kind of ignored. And that's a big reason why Wonder Woman wasn't working as a Nemesis game. Yeah, because he's the one who was thinking about it from like what is going to he identified the revenge loop, and he spent a lot of his time either hooking these things up and saying, hey, I think it'd be really cool if they could just run away sometimes. Why? Like, why does that make sense? Because it doesn't make sense from a game mechanic perspective. Like, why would you have the player win the fight and then you take it away? And like, this is actually a case where this is really bad because when that happens, the player doesn't get the loot. Uh, but he's got the story element and he's thinking of it from this broader perspective that nobody else was. So that this is what I want to say with this is like a person like this who is approaching your game from a different perspective is incredibly valuable, and you really can't afford to let that go to waste. Um, so I was talking about the narrative before, but having identified what the core gameplay player loop is, that drives once you've done that and you've said like this is what our game is about, that can drive a lot of your other decisions. You don't have to do this on every project, but if you do, everything is going to be so much nicer. If you can say, this is very similar to, the elevator pitch for your games, like, can you give me a sentence or two that makes your game make sense? That should also be able to solve your design problems and your narrative problems. So for us, we can say, this is a game about revenge against orcs. And so that drives all that stuff, and it drives the narrative as well. And it drives these characters. Like in our narrative, if you're the human ranger who is seeking revenge for having himself and his family killed, then your ghost pal, Celebrimbor, is the you already been totally consumed. He's the cautionary tale, but he's also the voice in your ear telling you to do it all the time. Uh, the elf Altariel, who you meet, who has been fighting for like 1,000 years, is a version of what you're doing. She's the one who's fighting the orcs in the darkness, but she's the version of it that stands for duty instead of revenge. Uh, so it's a contrast to the character. Baranor, the human, is kind of a version of Talion that lives. So he's expressing ideals that the main character can reflect on and say, I wish I could be like that, but I feel like I can't because I guess I'm evil. Uh, Shelob, and yes, this made more sense on paper than how they implemented it. Uh, but the concept is that it's the doomsayer who's going to predict your fate, and you're going to fight against it every step of the way. And so you talk to her, and she says, "You know this only ends one way," and you say, "No, it doesn't. I'm going to fight that," and that keeps on interacting with this cycle of narrative. And just like it's super useful, having identified the core of your game for solving these narrative problems, for writing every character to be a reflection of that, it can solve other design decisions as well. If it's there are so many decisions where it's not really clear what the best decision is, and the one that furthers the core of your game is such a good heuristic to use. A good example of that is like our gear system. So it's an action RPG. You're going to need to generate random loot. We know that, but we're thinking of it from the mechanic side of it. Like we know what we want, and we know that it's going to create those extrinsic motivations if I'm going to hunt for loot. But what if we know that it would be stronger if we could tie it into this core theme of our game, if we could tie it into the Nemesis system? So this became a design exercise. Like, well, what if we could solve it this way? In this case, it's like, well, what if we know that loot drops from orcs? So what if the loot, when it generated the traits, it generated them based on who the orc was and how they died. And then that's actually a map to how the orcs work, like how they gain traits as well. So this is like a player chart where players started figuring that out. And going, oh, if you kill a ranged guy, or no, if you kill a guy with range attacks and they drop a sword, it might give you Deathgiver. Or if you kill them when they're dazed, it might give you a sword that has Breath Stealer on it. Uh-huh. This was only going to happen if you have millions of players, like it just or super hardcore players. Like it kind of depends on. So you won't get benefits from this. So what does it mean for the player experience? This is, I would say, only moderately successful because I don't think it does a whole lot for the player experience. There's parts in here. It says who you killed to get it, and it has a death quote from that guy. So there's a clear intent there, right? It's like, can you remember this guy? Is this piece of gear meaningful to you because it's about a guy that you killed to get it? But I think this is kind of a moderate failure because this is actually really hard to remember in practice. Like you kind of need a picture of him, you need to know how he sounds. Um, However, there are simpler parts of this, like to get legendary gear, you have to kill legendary orcs. That's like the bone dead simple version of it, and that actually makes sense. And the legendary gear, to get if there's like 7 legendary swords, each one comes from a different tribe. So that was what we did, like message explicitly to players. And that's a simple version of it, where the wide version of this is following the same rules, but we don't tell people this because it makes it richer, but it doesn't drive player behavior. So it just wasn't worth spending like tutorialization time. So, um, if somebody asks what the Nemesis system is, the Nemesis system is using design to solve your procedural generation rather than using like a set of rules to do it. It's designed for the players. It's building stories that hook into existing game loops rather than trying to invent new ones or bolt onto things that already exist. And it's building your unique content only to support your best stories rather than feeling like you have to spread it across the entire game. That's what the Nemesis system is. And so for other proc gen, these are really important parts. You're building towards the player stories. You're not building towards all the possibilities that could come out. You don't care about all the possibilities. You want to push procedural generation towards the most interesting things. Understand that there's a layer of kind of baseline stuff that you need, and then pop the interesting things that the procedural generation can give you. Um, it's okay to repeat yourself and hit the same beat again and again. If your game is about revenge, keep hitting the revenge beat. Or if you're doing this, so in procedural generation, it's